She didn't scream when she found the fence cut open. Martha Whitmore just stood there in the summer heat, boots in the dirt, staring at the empty corral where her 3 Andalusians had been breathing and warm just hours before. No tears, just her jaw locked tight and her hands curled into fists at her sides. They didn't just take her horses. They took the only things left in this world she truly loved. If this story moves you, subscribe, stay until the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this valley reaches. The summer of 1887 came to the Whitmore Ranch like it always did, hot, unforgiving, and beautiful, in a way that almost made you forget how cruel the land could be. Martha Whitmore was 41 years old, and she had never once asked this valley for anything easy. She'd inherited the ranch from her father 11 years ago, 600 acres of grass and scrub and red rock tucked against the eastern edge of the manzanita forest that the locals called the brush. She'd kept every acre. She'd paid every debt. She'd buried her father, buried 2 hired hands taken by fever, and buried a marriage that didn't survive the second drought. And through all of it, she had kept her horses, 3 Andalusian mares. Silver Mariposa, the oldest and the wisest, gray as a winter sky, with a streak of white down her nose. Della Chestnut, and Restless, always the first one to the fence at feeding time. And Corazon, the youngest, barely 4 years old, with dark eyes that looked at Martha like she was the whole world. Those horses were not assets on a ledger. Martha knew that. She'd always known that, even when she pretended otherwise. She rose that morning at 5 o'clock, same as every morning. The heat was already building, pressing down through the dark like something alive. She pulled on her boots, her canvas work shirt, her hat. She didn't light a lamp. She didn't need one. She knew every board of this house, every step, every creak. She pushed open the back door and walked toward the corral. The gate was open, not swinging loose, cut open. The latch post had been pulled clean from the ground, the fencing wire snipped in 3 places. Someone had done this carefully, quietly, with tools. Not a desperate man looking for one horse to sell. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Martha stood at the open gate and looked at the empty corral for a long time. The ground was churned. Hoof prints in 3 directions spreading out like fingers. And in the dust near the fence line, boot prints. More than 2 sets. Men who'd moved fast and worked in silence while she slept 40 yards away. She didn't move for a full minute. Then she turned around and walked back to the house. Caleb. She spoke at once, flat and quiet, outside the foreman's bunkhouse door. She heard him roll off the cot inside, heard his boots hit the floor. The door opened 30 seconds later, and Caleb Hart stood there squinting at her in the gray pre-dawn light, his shirt half-buttoned, suspenders hanging loose at his hips. Caleb was 36, lean as fence wire with a jaw like a hatchet, and eyes that had seen enough hard years to read a situation fast. He took one look at Martha's face and went still. "How many?" he said. "All 3. He said nothing, just pressed his lips together and looked past her toward the corral. Then he stepped back inside and started buttoning his shirt. "I'll get Luke," he said. "Get him fast." Luke Garrett was their tracker, a quiet man from Texas who'd spent 10 years reading the ground the way some men read scripture. He didn't say much, and when he did, he said it plainly. Martha trusted him more than almost anyone alive, precisely because he had never once told her what she wanted to hear. He was crouched at the north fence line when the sun finally cracked the ridge, running his fingers along the edge of a hoof print in the dry dust. 3 horses moved fast, he said without looking up. Mariposa's the heaviest, her prints deeper on the right front. She was already limping before they left this fence. Martha felt something cold move through her chest. "She's injured. Favoring that leg, yes ma'am. Not bad enough to slow him down, but they were pushing her." He stood tracking the marks with his eyes toward the brush. Men on horseback, maybe 4 riders total. They split up here. He pointed to a spot where the trail fractured into 3 separate directions. 2 different draws and 1 straight into the manzanita. "They split the horses up," Caleb said, not a question. Yes, sir. Luke tilted his hat back. Smart. Make it harder to follow all three. By the time you pick a direction, they've got lead on you. Martha looked at the tree line. The manzanita forest ran thick and dark along the north ridge, a tangle of iron-hard branches and red bark that could tear a horse to pieces if you pushed too fast through it. The locals called it the brush, for a reason it didn't so much grow as choke, crowding out light and space and sound until the world beyond it stopped feeling real. "Can you track them in there?" she asked. Luke was quiet for a moment. "I can track 'em," he said. "I just can't promise what we find when we do." Martha. Caleb stepped up beside her, speaking low. "We need to talk about who did this before we go charging into that brush." "I know who did it." "You think you do." She turned and looked at him. "Last month, Lydia LeBon's man came to this door with a purchase offer. I turned him away. Week before that, I got a notice from the county about a water rights dispute that didn't exist until someone filed it. And now my horses are gone." She looked back at the tree line. "I know who did it." Caleb didn't argue. He'd met Lydia LeBon once at a land auction in town, and that once had been enough. She was a woman of perhaps 50, immaculate in Eastern dress, with a voice like cold creek water, perfectly pleasant, and somehow deeply alarming. She represented a consortium of investors who had been quietly acquiring land across 3 counties for the past 4 years. Ranches that went under, estates sold at probate, properties with tangled titles or troubled water rights. The Whitmore Ranch sat at the top of a valley that controlled water access to nearly 12,000 acres of surrounding land. If Lydia LeBon got this ranch, she got everything that depended on it. "She can't steal your horses and call that a legal transaction," Caleb said. "She doesn't need to." Martha's voice was flat and steady, but her hands had curled at her sides again. "She needs me desperate. She needs me off balance. She needs me to miss a payment or pick a fight I can't win or make a decision I can't take back." She paused. "Taking my horses is how she starts." Then we go to the sheriff. The sheriff in this county took a consulting fee from LeBon's people in March. Luke told me. She glanced at Luke, who nodded without expression. "We have no law here. We have ourselves." Caleb was quiet. Then, "That brush doesn't give things back alive, Martha." "I know that. Last man who went deep after strays didn't come out for 4 days, and when he did, his horse didn't come out at all." "Caleb, I'm saying it's a risk I'm not sure we can afford. Those are my horses." Her voice didn't rise, but something in it went tight and sharp, like wire under tension. "Mariposa is out there right now with a bad leg being pushed through that brush, and Della hasn't been away from this corral in 2 years, and Corazon—" She stopped, pressed her mouth shut, started again. "I am not standing here and waiting. I will not do that." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he put his hat on and turned toward the horses. "I'll saddle up," he said. They rode for 2 hours before the brush swallowed the light. Luke led them north first, following the clearest set of prints, the trail that went straight into the manzanita without hesitating. Whoever had taken that route knew the forest, knew the gaps in the canopy, the dry creek beds that cut through the thicket and gave a horse room to move. "They've been in here before," Luke said, pausing at a spot where the brush had been cut back, not recently, but deliberately. "Somebody cleared this path. Weeks ago, maybe more." He looked at Martha. This was planned a long time back. Martha felt something cold settle in her stomach. Of course it was planned. That was how Lydia LeBon operated. Not in desperation, in architecture. They followed the path deeper. The temperature dropped as the canopy thickened above them, cutting off the summer sun. The air smelled of dust and dry resin, and something faintly metallic that Martha couldn't name. Then Luke held up his hand. They stopped. He was crouched low again, looking at the ground. Martha came forward and saw it immediately, a dark stain on a flat rock. Dried, rust-colored, blood. "Mariposa," Luke said quietly. "Her right front. She's bleeding." He looked up at the trail ahead. "Not bad enough to stop them, but she's hurting." Martha's jaw went tight. She didn't speak. "There's more here," Luke said, moving forward carefully. He pointed to where the ground had been scraped and churned a horse being pulled, resisting digging in. "She fought them. Right here she fought." "Good girl," Martha said very quietly, almost to herself. "Trouble is," Luke said, standing, "they won the fight." He looked down the trail. They kept going. And they moved faster after this, so they were angry. That's not good for the horses. "How far ahead?" 2 hours, maybe 3. On foot from here, we'd lose the light before we caught them." He paused. "But I think I know where they're headed." "Talk." "There's an old mining claim up in the northwest ridge, abandoned maybe 20 years. Cabin's still standing. I've seen it on the county maps. It's got a natural corral built into the rock-old pen from when they kept mules up there." He looked at her steadily. "It's the only place up here with shelter and containment. If they're keeping the horses somewhere, it's there." Martha turned and looked at Caleb. He said nothing. She turned back to Luke. "How long to get there from here?" "Before dark if we push." "Then we push." But the brush had other ideas. They pushed for another hour, following Luke's read of the terrain, when the trails split again, and this time the split was confusing. The prints scattered across a dry creek bed in a way that Luke studied for a long time without speaking. "They did this deliberately," he finally said. "Swept the ground behind them. Not perfectly, I can still see fragments, but enough to slow us down. So they knew we'd follow. They counted on it." He stood rubbing dust from his fingers. "Somebody who knows tracking was on this crew. They weren't just hired muscle." Martha stood at the center of the creek bed and felt the weight of the afternoon bearing down. The sun was moving. Time was moving. And somewhere in this forest, Mariposa was bleeding and frightened, and Della was separated from everything she'd ever known, and Corazon. "Don't think about Corazon right now. Think about what you know." "Luke," she said, "if you were them, and you were bringing 3 horses to that mining cabin, and you knew someone was following you, would you bring all 3 horses by the same route?" He thought about it. "No, I'd split them. Move them in separate groups, let them arrive at different times. Even if someone tracked one group, the others would be safe. So Mariposa's trail might be a decoy. Might be. And the other 2 horses might have gone a different direction entirely. Possibly." Martha looked at the creek bed, at the deliberately confused prints, at the fading afternoon light. "Then we split up," she said. Caleb stepped forward immediately. "Martha, I'll go after Mariposa's trail. She's hurt, and she needs help fastest. You and Luke take the southern draw, see if you can pick up the other 2. We meet at the mining cabin by nightfall." She held up a hand before he could speak. "Caleb, I am not asking for your permission. I am telling you the plan." He looked at her hard for a moment. Then, "You take my rifle. I have my own. Mine's got better range. Take it." He pulled it from the saddle scabbard and held it out. When she took it, he said quietly, just to her, "Don't do anything I would do." Despite everything, despite the blood on the rocks and the dying afternoon and the anger sitting like a coal in her chest, Martha almost smiled. "I'll do worse," she said. She was alone in the brush within minutes. It was different being alone in it. The sounds changed, not louder exactly, but more present. The dry click of branches against each other. The distant call of something she couldn't name. The sound of her own horse's breathing. Ranger's steady rhythm, the only familiar thing in a world going strange and dark around her. She followed what remained of Mariposa's trail, picking it up fragment by fragment, a smear of blood on a branch at horse-shoulder height, a displaced stone, the faint indentation of a heavy hoof in a patch of pale dust. Luke had taught her enough over the years to read the basics. She wasn't a tracker. But she could follow pain. And then she heard something. Not ahead of her. To the left, deeper into the thicket, where the brush went so thick that even the afternoon light barely reached. A sound like something breathing slow, labored wet at the edges. She stopped Ranger. Sat perfectly still. Again. She dismounted, tied Ranger to a branch and moved on foot into the thicket. The branches tore at her sleeves and her hat, and she pressed through them low and slow, following the sound. It was maybe 30 yards off the trail. Then 20. Then 10. She pushed through a wall of twisted manzanita branches and stopped. Mariposa stood in a small clear space among the brush, not large enough to call a clearing, just a gap in the tangle where the trees had grown apart. She was pressed against a boulder, head low, breathing in that labored, wet way that Martha had heard from a distance. Her right foreleg was wrapped in a dirty strip of cloth, and the cloth was dark. She was alone. The men were gone. They'd left her here injured, unable to keep pace, probably intending to come back for her later, or simply writing her off. Martha felt her throat close up. "Hey," she said softly. Just that. One word. Mariposa's head came up. Her ears moved. Her dark eyes found Martha across the small space, and something in the horse's body changed, not dramatically, not a leap or a whinny, just a slow release of tension, like a knot coming loose. Her breath steadied slightly. Martha walked forward slowly, hands out and open, not rushing. She talked the whole way, nothing important, just words, her voice doing the work that words couldn't. "I'm here. I see you. It's all right. I'm here." She reached Mariposa and put her hands on the horse's neck, and the animal pressed into her, with the whole weight of her exhaustion. Martha felt it in her arms, in her chest, in a place she couldn't name. "I've got you," she said. "I've got you now." She looked at the leg, unwrapped the cloth, carefully wincing at what she found beneath. The wound was deep, but not fatal. Whoever had tied it off had at least done that much, perhaps to keep a blood trail from being followed. The bleeding had slowed, but Mariposa couldn't be ridden out, couldn't walk fast. Martha looked around the small space. She was alone. The light was failing. She had a wounded horse and no way to move quickly, and she was deep enough in the brush that calling out for Caleb or Luke would be pointless. She sat down in the dust next to Mariposa and thought. They planned this. They chose this terrain. They knew we'd come in, and they knew this forest would work against us. Every move they made was designed to separate us, exhaust us, put us in exactly this position, scattered, isolated, losing the light. They thought about everything. She leaned her head back against the boulder. Almost everything, because here was the thing about Lydia LeBon's carefully constructed plan. Martha thought it had accounted for a ranch owner chasing stolen property. It had accounted for the law being compromised and the terrain being hostile, and the timeline working against pursuit. What it had not accounted for was that Martha Whitmore was not chasing her horses because they were property. She was chasing them because they were hers, not in the ledger sense, not in the legal sense, but in the way that you loved something, and the love didn't care about deeds or documents. And that kind of chase didn't have a logical stopping point. She heard a branch move somewhere in the brush behind her. Her hand went to the rifle. Then a voice, low, steady, not threatening, "Easy now, I'm not one of them." Martha didn't lower the rifle. A woman stepped into the gap between the manzanita branches. She was perhaps 55, dark-skinned, with long, gray-streaked hair, braided back, and clothes that belonged to no particular fashion, practical, layered, worn soft by years of use. She carried nothing in her hands. Her eyes went immediately to Mariposa, not to Martha, and she moved toward the horse slowly, and with complete certainty, as if she'd been walking toward this specific horse in this specific place her whole life. Mariposa didn't flinch. "Who are you?" Martha said. The rifle was still up. The woman didn't look at her. She was examining Mariposa's leg, now turning the wrapped cloth back with careful hands. "Name's Marquetta," she said. "I live in this brush." She paused, fingers moving gently along the wound. "That leg's going to need poultice and rest 3 days minimum before she walks steady, but she'll be all right." She looked up at Martha for the first time. "You can put that rifle down. If I meant you harm, I'd have done it while you were sitting against that rock thinking." Martha held the rifle for one more moment. Then she lowered it. "You've been watching me," she said. "I've been watching all of you," Marquetta said. "Since this morning, I saw them bring the horses through 4 men, 3 horses, one of them already hurting. She looked back at the leg. I know the men who did this, and I know who sent them. Martha went very still. Lydia LeBon. Marquetta nodded. She's been preparing this for 8 months. The mining cabin on the northwest ridge, that's her staging ground. She's got men up there, and she's got the other 2 horses, and she's got a document she intends to present to the county clerk by Friday morning, claiming your land has been abandoned following financial default. She looked at Martha steadily. She manufactured the default. You'll find the account records were altered at the bank. She has someone inside. Martha stared at her. How do you know all this? Because people don't pay much attention to an old woman in the brush. Marquetta's voice was completely level. I've been watching Lydia LeBon's people move through this valley for the better part of a year. They don't see me. Most people don't. Why are you telling me this? Marquetta was quiet for a moment, her hands still moving gently over Mariposa's leg. Because this valley is not a transaction, she finally said. And someone has to say so. Outside the gap in the manzanita, the summer light was failing. The heat of the day was finally breaking, and somewhere in the darkening brush, Caleb and Luke were pushing toward the northwest ridge, and Martha Whitmore sat in the dust next to her wounded horse, listening to a woman she'd never met tell her things that changed the shape of everything, and feeling for the first time all day that she might actually be in the right fight. All right, she said quietly. She looked at Marquetta. Tell me everything. Marquetta's hands never stopped moving while she talked. That was the thing Martha noticed first. The woman worked and spoke at the same time as if stillness was something she'd given up on long ago. She pulled a small cloth pouch from inside her layered jacket, shook dried herbs into her palm, and began pressing them against Mariposa's wound with steady, practiced pressure, while the words came out quiet and even like water moving over stone. LeBon's people first came through this brush in October, Marquetta said. Not to hunt, not to ride. They walked the tree lines on foot, which is how I knew they were looking for something specific. She tied off the poultice with a strip of clean cloth from her bag. They were mapping the water routes, every creek bed, every seasonal draw, every place where the underground water comes close enough to the surface to tap. She glanced up at Martha briefly, then back at the leg. This valley sits on top of the largest underground aquifer in 3 counties. Lydia LeBon doesn't want your horses and she doesn't want your land. She wants the water under it. Martha said nothing. She was watching Mariposa's breathing steady as Marquetta worked the horses' muscles, releasing their rigid panic inch by inch. She was also turning over what she'd just heard and feeling it land with the particular weight of something that explained too many things at once. The water rights dispute, Martha said. The one filed with the county 2 months ago. Filed by a shell company that doesn't exist, Marquetta said. Registered in another state. By the time anyone traces it back, the land will already have changed hands. She stood wiping her hands on a cloth. She did the same thing to the Callaway place last spring, and the Hendersons before that. She is very good at this. How many people know what you know? Marquetta looked at her with something that was not quite a smile, more like the expression of someone who had learned not to expect that question. Nobody who can prove it, she said. Knowing and proving aren't the same country, Mrs. Whitmore. Martha. Martha. She nodded once. You can know everything she's done and still lose this ranch by Friday if you don't move right. Martha stood up from the dust. Her knees ached from sitting on the hard ground, and she didn't let herself think about it. Then tell me how to move right. Marquetta studied her for a moment, not sizing her up something different, something more like recognition. Your foreman and your tracker, she said. Where are they heading? Northwest Ridge, the old mining cabin. Good instinct from your tracker. That's right. She folded the remaining herbs back into her pouch. But 4 armed men are expecting visitors tonight, and if your people walk up that ridge the obvious way, they'll be seen before they get within 100 yards. She paused. There's another way in, a dry creek bed that runs behind the cabin on the north side. The brush there is so thick nobody's cut through it in years, but it opens up about 40 feet from the back of the corral pen. She looked at Martha steadily. I can get you to it. Can you get Mariposa out? Marquetta glanced at the horse. Not tonight. She needs to rest that leg or she'll do permanent damage. She's safe here. They don't know I found her, and they won't come back for her until morning, if then. They've already written her off. Her voice was level, but there was something underneath it, something old and tired and angry that she kept very carefully controlled. They write things off quickly when they stop being useful. That's how they think. Martha looked at Mariposa. The horse was calmer now, standing steady against the boulder, the new poultice already doing some visible work. Her breathing was even. Her eyes were half closed. She'll be all right here tonight. I'll stay with her, Marquetta said. And you'll be more useful on that ridge than sitting in this gap worrying. It was the right thing to say. Martha knew it was the right thing to say, and she hated slightly how efficiently it moved her to action because it meant there was no argument to make. She looked at Mariposa one more time at the gray mare's face, the streak of white down her nose, the slow movement of her breathing, and she pressed her hand briefly against the horse's neck. I'll be back for you, she said quietly. I promise you that. Then she turned to Marquetta. Show me the creek bed. They moved through the brush in single file, Marquetta, leading with the ease of someone who had learned this terrain so thoroughly that the branches seemed to part for her rather than resist. Martha followed close, leading Ranger by the reins, her rifle slung across her back. The last of the summer light had gone from gold to copper, to a dim gray blue that drained color from everything it touched. Neither of them spoke for a while. The brush was different at dusk, quieter on the surface, but with a deeper sound underneath it, a low hum of insects and settling branches and things moving in the spaces between that Martha couldn't identify. You said you've been watching Laban's people for a year, Martha said, keeping her voice low. Close to it. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Marquetta didn't answer immediately. She stepped over a root, ducked under a branch, kept moving. Then, would you have believed me? Martha thought about it honestly. 8 months ago, if a woman she'd never met had walked out of the brush to tell her that a consortium of Eastern investors was plotting to steal her water rights through manufactured bank fraud, would she have believed it? Or would she have thanked her politely and sent her off and filed it away as the story of an eccentric woman who lived alone in the trees? Probably not, she admitted. People believe what the ground shows them, Marquetta said. I've learned to wait until the ground shows enough. They came out of a dense stand of manzanita into a narrow depression, the dry creek bed barely wider than a horse's shoulders cutting north through the brush. The rock on either side was pale and streaked with old mineral deposits, and the ground was packed hard. Sound would carry differently here. Martha's boots were quiet on the stone. How far? She asked. 1/4 mile. Marquetta stopped and turned around. The creek bends left and opens up on the north side of the cabin. When you come out of it, there's a large rock formation, maybe shoulder height between you and the corral. They can't see you from the cabin windows if you stay low behind it. She paused. There are 2 men at the cabin, one inside, one outside, walking the perimeter. The third I'm not sure of, he may have gone back down the ridge to report in. The fourth is the one I'm most worried about. Why? Because he's the tracker they hired. Not your man Luke, a different one. Name's Vargas. He's been working for Laban for 2 years, and he is very good at what he does. She met Martha's eyes. If Vargas is still at that cabin tonight, he'll hear you coming. Not see you hear you. The creek bed is your best approach because it covers your sound somewhat, but he'll still be listening. Martha held her gaze. And if he hears us, then you need to move faster than he can react. A pause. Do not give him time to organize. Whatever you do up there, don't give those men time to get organized. Speed is everything tonight. Martha nodded. She thought of Caleb and Luke somewhere in the darkening forest ahead of her, working their way toward the ridge by the southern draw. She had no way to signal them, no way to coordinate what was coming, which meant she had to get to them first. Thank you, she said. Marquetta had already started back toward the gap, where Mariposa rested. She paused without turning around. Bring them home, she said. Just that. Martha turned north and pressed forward into the creek bed, Ranger moving quiet and careful behind her on the stone, both of them moving through the failing light toward whatever the ridge held waiting. She did not let herself think about how outnumbered she was. She thought about Mariposa's breathing steadying under Marquetta's hands. She thought about Della and Corazon somewhere in that corral on the northwest ridge, probably hungry and frightened and waiting for a sound they recognized. She thought about Lydia LeBon sitting somewhere comfortable and dry, watching a clock counting on Martha Whitmore being exactly as alone and lost as she was supposed to be. That thought moved Martha's feet faster than anything else could. She came out of the creek bed bend in full dark, the summer stars breaking hard and bright overhead. The rock formation Marquetta had described was right where she'd said, a low shoulder of pale stone close enough to the corral pen that she could hear breathing from the horses before she saw them. She pressed herself flat behind the rock and listened. 2 horses. She could hear 2 distinct rhythms of breath, 2 sets of restless movement. Della and Corazon. Both alive, both present, both unhurt as far as she could tell from sound alone. She pressed her hand against the rock and felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, not yet, but proof of life, which was close enough. She listened beyond the horses. From the direction of the cabin, maybe 60 feet away, she could hear a lamp burning. The specific silence of a man inside a small space, the creak of a chair, the occasional scrape of boot on wood floor. One man inside. The perimeter walker was the problem. She hadn't heard him yet, and that was its own kind of information. Then Caleb's voice came from 3 feet to her left, so quiet she almost missed it. "Don't shoot. It's me." Martha's hand flew to her rifle and came back down in the same motion. She pressed herself tighter against the rock. Caleb materialized from the shadows, moving flat and low in a way that she hadn't seen him move in years, the way he'd moved, she supposed, before he'd come to work for her, and settled into the rhythms of ranch life. Luke was 2 steps behind him, barely a sound. "How did you get here?" she breathed. "Southern draw opened up behind the ridge faster than I expected," Caleb said, his voice barely above nothing. "Luke found a secondary trail. Took us up the back of the ridge instead of the front." He glanced at her. "Where's Mariposa?" "Safe. Injured but safe. I'll explain later." She looked at Luke. 2 horses in that pen. How many men?" Luke leaned close. "We counted 3 on the approach. 1 inside 1 walking perimeter. He comes around the east side of the cabin every 12 minutes. We've timed 2 passes. 3rd man we can't locate. He may be in the tree line on the north side, which is where we came from." "That's Vargas," Martha said. "He's their tracker. He's listening." Luke went still. Then he nodded slowly. "That explains the quiet on the north approach. It felt wrong. Too quiet." He looked at Martha. "He knows we're close." The word landed between them like a stone into water. "How long before he moves?" Martha asked. "If he knows we're here." "Minutes," Luke said. "He's waiting to see what we do, where we commit." Caleb looked at Martha. She could see it in his face, even in the dark, the way he was calculating, the way his jaw worked once before he spoke. "Martha, if we do this, we do it now. Not in 10 minutes. Now." "I know." "The perimeter man comes around in..." Luke glanced at the cabin, counting. 6 minutes. If we go before he clears the east side, we've got a window. Get to the pen, cut it, move the horses back into the creek bed before he completes his pass. And the man inside. If he stays inside, we're gone before he knows it. A beat. If he comes out, I'll handle it, Caleb said flatly. Martha looked at the corral. 60 feet of open ground between the rock and the pen gate. No cover. The lamp in the cabin window threw a pale rectangle of light that didn't reach the pen, but came close on the near side. She looked at Luke. North tree line. If Vargas is there, and he moves when we do. I'll see him, Luke said. I'll give you the time. She looked at Caleb. He was already watching the cabin with the expression of a man who had made his decision and was waiting to move. She looked at the rock formation, the dark ground between it and the corral, the dim shapes of Della and Corazon shifting in the pen. 2 horses alive and present and waiting. 6 minutes, she said. 5 now, Luke said. She took a breath, let it out slow. Felt the rifle in her hands. Caleb's rifle better range and shifted her grip. All right, she said. And the night went very quiet the way it always did in those last seconds before everything changed. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. 4 minutes. Caleb moved left along the rock, giving himself a wider angle on the cabin door. Luke faded back toward the tree line on their right, moving so quietly that Martha lost him in the dark within seconds. She was left alone behind the rock, watching the cabin window, counting the seconds in her chest. 3 minutes. From the north tree line, nothing. No sound, no movement. Which meant either Vargas wasn't there, or he was very good. 2 minutes. The lamp in the cabin flickered once steadied. The chair inside creaked. Someone coughing low and brief. 1 minute. Martha pressed off the rock and moved. She went straight and fast. Not crouching. Crouching slowed you down and made noise in different places. She moved at a controlled run, boot heels, pulling up before they fully landed the rifle, angled low and forward. The ground between the rock and the pen was hard-packed, and it was 40 steps, and she counted them without thinking. 38. 39. The pen gate. She found the latch by feel a simple iron drop bar, heavy cold against her fingers. She lifted it, swung the gate open, and stepped inside in the same motion. Della moved first. The chestnut mare had heard her coming, had recognized her, the smell of her, the particular rhythm of her movement, and she was already turning toward the gate when Martha reached her. Martha grabbed the halter rope that had been looped around the post, pulled it free, looped it back around Della's neck. Easy, she breathed. Easy, we're going. Come on. Corazon was pressed to the far rail eyes, white-rimmed in the dark, shaking with the fine tremor of a young horse that had been frightened for too many hours. Martha moved to her, kept her voice absolutely level, got the halter rope, pulled her gently toward the gate. The cabin door opened. Not fast, not like someone alarmed. Like someone stepping out for air. A man's silhouette in the doorway lamplight behind him, pausing on the threshold. Martha froze inside the pen. Both horses froze with her, picking up her stillness, the way horses did, mirroring the human's body without knowing why. The man in the doorway was looking out at the dark. Not toward the pen, toward the tree line. Something had caught his attention in that direction. Then a sound came from the north tree line. A sharp crack like a branch under weight, sudden and decisive. The man's head swung toward it. And from behind the corral rock, Caleb Hart stepped out into the lamplight with his hands open and empty, and his voice carrying the particular flat authority of a man who did not intend to repeat himself. "I wouldn't," he said. The man in the doorway went rigid. "Both hands," Caleb said. Slow. The man's hands came up. He wasn't young, mid-40s, thick through the shoulders, with the look of someone who worked outdoors for rough people. He looked at Caleb's empty hands, looked at the rifle Martha could see Caleb had slung behind his shoulder, and made the calculation quickly. "There are 3 of us," the man said. "There are 2 of you," Caleb said. "Your perimeter man is on the ground on the east side. He walked into a problem. Your tracker in the tree line has a rifle on him, and he knows it." He paused. "And the woman inside your horse pen is about to leave with what belongs to her. So what I need you to do right now is sit down on that step and keep your hands where I can see them." A long silence. "Who are you people?" the man said. "We're the ones who didn't want trouble," Caleb said. "And here we all are." The man sat down on the step. Martha moved. She walked Della and Corazon out of the pen together, both ropes in her hands, the horses moving with her in the heightened, precise way of animals that understand urgency without understanding its source. She came around the side of the corral, keeping the rock between herself and the cabin door, and she did not look back. She heard Caleb's footsteps behind her almost immediately. Then Luke's voice, very quiet, from the direction of the tree line. North side is clear. Vargas is not here. He left. Martha stopped. He left, she said. Tracks go down the ridge south side. Fast. He ran. Luke materialized from the shadows, his own rifle leveled and watching. An hour ago from the age of the prince. He cleared out before we even got here. Martha and Caleb looked at each other. Why would he run? Caleb said. Luke shook his head slowly. Man like that doesn't run from a fight. He runs when the fight has already been lost somewhere else. He looked at Martha. Like maybe someone got to his employer before we got to this cabin. Martha turned it over. The water rights documents, the bank records, the county clerk filing. Marquetta's words, knowing and proving, aren't the same country, and the question that had been sitting underneath all of it since the gap in the Manzanita. Marquetta had been watching Laban's operation for a year. Watching, documenting, waiting for the ground to show enough. We need to get back, Martha said. Not urgently, with the controlled weight of someone who has just seen the edges of a larger picture and understands she's been looking at the wrong part of it. We need to get these horses out of this brush, and we need to get back to the ranch. What about the man at the cabin? Caleb said. He'll walk down that ridge when it gets light. She was already moving the horses, following her lead down the creek bed. He's hired help. He's not the problem. Martha. Caleb fell into step beside her, close enough to speak low. What do you know that I don't? Nothing yet, she said. But I think someone's been working on our side of this fight for longer than we realized. And I think by morning, we're going to understand a lot more about what Lydia Laban has actually been doing in this valley. They moved through the creek bed in the dark. 3 people and 2 horses, the summer stars thrown hard and white across the sky above the Manzanita canopy. The brush was quieter than it had been at dusk, a different kind of quiet, less waiting, and more settled, as if whatever tension had been held in the air all day had finally exhaled. Martha's mind was moving the whole way. The bank records, the shell company, the manufactured default. Marquetta had described a machine, a precise, layered, long-running operation designed to look like legal process while being something else entirely. And a machine that complex left marks. Paper trails. People who'd been paid. People who'd been pressured. People who'd signed things they maybe hadn't looked at closely enough. And a woman who'd been moving through the edges of that machine for a year, watching it, learning it, waiting. I've been watching Laban's people move through this valley for the better part of a year. They don't see me. The question was what Marquetta had done with a year of watching. Because she hadn't come to Martha tonight just to help a wounded horse and share information. That wasn't Martha felt it couldn't prove it yet, but felt it the whole of what was happening here. There was more. There had to be more. They came out of the brush at the south edge an hour before midnight. The ranch was dark ahead of them, the house standing quiet against the star-washed sky. The broken fence of the corral gaped in the dark, and Martha walked Della and Corazon through it without stopping, tied them at the water trough, checked them over quickly with her hands in the dark. Della drank deeply, steadily. Corazon pressed her head against Martha's shoulder and stood there without moving, and Martha let her standing in the dark with the horse's weight warm against her, feeling the long day in every part of her body. She all right? Caleb asked, watching Corazon. She's scared, Martha said. She'll settle. She stepped back reluctant and looked at the empty space in the corral where Mariposa should have been. We go back for Mariposa at first light. She can't be moved tonight. Agreed. Caleb was watching her face. You going to sleep? No. Martha, someone altered records at the bank, she said. Lydia Laban has a contact inside the county clerk's office and possibly inside the bank itself. By Friday morning, she intends to walk into that clerk's office with a manufactured default and take this ranch on paper. She looked at him. It's Tuesday night. That gives us less than 3 days. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, what do we do? Martha turned toward the house. We figure out what Marquetta Brown has been building for a year, she said, and then we figure out how to use it. She pushed open the back door and walked into the dark kitchen. The heat of the day still sitting in the walls, the summer night pressing close and warm all around her. She went to the desk in the corner. Her father's desk, a heavy oak thing that had survived 2 fires and a flood, and 11 years of her using it, and she pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside was a locked strongbox. Inside the strongbox, behind the land deed and the water rights documentation and the account ledgers, was a folder she'd put together over the past 2 months. Notes. Dates. Copies of documents she'd requested from the county recorder's office, on a hunch she hadn't fully trusted. The water rights dispute filing. The name of the shell company. A letter from her bank dated 6 weeks ago about a discrepancy in her account that she'd assumed was clerical error. She spread it all across the desktop. Then she sat down and started reading it again, this time with a different question in mind. Not what does this mean, but where is the proof? Caleb came in behind her and set a cup of coffee at her elbow without being asked, and she didn't look up, and neither of them spoke. Luke had gone to the bunkhouse. The horses were at the trough. Somewhere in the brush, in a small gap between the manzanita branches, an old gray mare breathed slowly and steadily, next to a woman who had been watching this valley for a year and had chosen tonight of all nights to stop watching and act. The lamp on the desk burned low, and Martha Whitmore read. And outside the window, the summer night moved toward morning, and Friday was coming fast. She found it at 2 in the morning. Not everything, not the full picture, but one piece of it, a piece she hadn't recognized for what it was when she'd first received it. The letter from the bank 6 weeks ago. She'd read it as a clerical error notice. She read it now and saw it differently, saw the specific language, the specific account numbers, the specific timing of the discrepancy, and understood that what she was looking at was not an error notice at all. It was a record of an alteration, made by someone inside the bank who had perhaps deliberately, perhaps out of something like conscience, generated a paper trail of what they'd done. She sat back in the chair. Caleb was asleep at the kitchen table, head on his arms, his cup empty beside him. Martha looked at the letter for a long time. Someone inside the bank had altered her records, and then had sent her a letter that documented the alteration disguised as a routine notice in language careful enough to be deniable and specific enough to be used. She thought of Marquetta in the brush. They don't see me. I've been watching. She thought of a machine that size, that complex, the number of people it required, the number of hands it passed through, and the near mathematical certainty that somewhere in all those hands there was someone who had looked at what they were part of and felt something they didn't expect to feel, someone who couldn't stop it from the inside, but could leave a door open. Martha looked at the lamp, at the papers spread across her father's desk, at the locked box with the deed inside it, the deed to 600 acres, and the water beneath them. She wasn't going to lose this, but more than that, she wasn't going to just defend it. Marquetta had said, knowing and proving aren't the same country. And Martha had spent the whole day on the wrong side of that border chasing what she could see, instead of building what she could use. That changed now. She picked up a pen, pulled a clean sheet of paper from the drawer, and she began to write carefully in her precise accountant's hand the letter that she intended to have in front of a federal land commissioner by Thursday morning. The coffee had gone cold at her elbow. The lamp burned. Outside, Della and Corazon stood quiet at the trough, and Tuesday night moved toward Wednesday with the particular slow wait of a clock that knows how much it's being watched. She finished the letter at 3:47 in the morning. Caleb was still asleep at the table, his breathing slow and even, one hand curled loosely around the empty coffee cup. Martha didn't wake him. She folded the letter, sealed it inside an envelope, and wrote the address of the Federal Land Commissioner's office in careful block letters across the front. Then she set it on top of the strongbox and looked at it for a long moment, the way you look at something you've just committed to, something you can't take back. She had written 4 pages. Every piece of documentation she had, the bank letter, the water rights filing the shell company, named the timeline she'd been reconstructing since October when the first odd thing had happened, and she'd noted it in her ledger without fully understanding what she was noting. She had laid it out in plain direct language the way her father had taught her to write business correspondence. No drama, no accusation she couldn't support, just facts in order, each one pointing at the next. It wasn't enough to convict anyone. She knew that, but it was enough to open a door. She went to bed at 4 and was up again at 5:30 before the sun had fully cleared the ridge. Her body ached from the previous day in the specific way of a person who had asked it to do too much and slept too little, but she moved through it the way she always moved through physical discomfort, by not acknowledging it, by giving it no room in her attention. Caleb was already outside when she came down, standing at the water trough with Della and Corazon, checking them over in the early light. He looked up when he heard her boots on the porch steps. "They're good," he said. "Both of them. Corazon's still a little spooked, but she's eating." "Good." Martha came to the trough, put her hand on Della's neck, felt the warmth there, the solid presence. "We go back for Mariposa this morning." "I know." He looked at her. "You sleep any?" "Some." He studied her face for a second, and clearly decided not to press it. "Luke's already up. He wants to go early before the heat builds." "Then we go now." Caleb hesitated. Just briefly, a half-second pause that she caught because she'd known him long enough to read his silences as clearly as his words. "Martha, that man from the cabin last night, he walked off that ridge sometime this morning." She looked at him. "He'll go back to Laban's people," Caleb said. "He'll tell them what happened. They'll know we got the horses back." "I know that." "Which means by this afternoon, Laban knows her plan is compromised. Which means she might move faster. Push the Friday filing up." "I know that too." Martha turned toward the barn. "Which is why I need that letter on a horse to Millfield before noon. Who's carrying it?" "You are." She stopped and looked back at him over her shoulder. "Luke and I will get Mariposa. You ride to Millfield, find the postal agent, the federal one, not county, the one at the railway office, and you put that letter in his hands personally. Not on the counter. In his hands." She held his gaze. "And Caleb, if anyone tries to stop you on that road, they won't," he said with a flatness that settled the question entirely. She nodded. "There's something else. In Millfield, there's a lawyer named Samuel Pratt. He's not county. He practices federal land law. I used him 7 years ago for the water easement with the Hendersons. Find him and tell him what's happening. Tell him about the shell company and the bank records and Friday's filing. Tell him I need someone who can read what I've written and tell me if it's enough to delay the clerk's action." "And if it's not enough?" Martha's jaw tightened once. "Then he tells me what else I need." She went inside, pulled the letter from the top of the strongbox, and brought it out to Caleb. He tucked it inside his jacket close against his chest. He didn't say anything else, and neither did she. And that was its own kind of understanding, the kind that came from 11 years of working the same land together, through things that couldn't always be put into words. Luke was at the barn when she got there, her own horse Ranger already saddled and waiting. He handed her the reins without comment and mounted his own horse, and they left the ranch at first light, heading north into the brush, while Caleb turned south toward Millfield with a letter that held, as far as Martha could determine, whatever chance this fight had of being won legally. The brush was different in the morning. The same tangle of manzanita and iron-hard branches, the same choked light. But the air was cooler, and the sounds were different. The particular early morning sounds of a world still deciding what kind of day it intended to be. Martha followed the creek bed north, retracing the path from the previous night, and Luke rode close behind her without speaking. She was thinking about Marquetta. Specifically, she was thinking about the way Marquetta had moved the certainty in her hands when she treated Mariposa's wound, the precision of her knowledge about Laban's operation, the specific details she'd offered without being asked, the shell company, the bank contact, the 8-month timeline. That was not the knowledge of someone who happened to live in the brush and noticed things in passing. That was the knowledge of someone who had been deliberately and methodically building a case. And the question that had been sitting underneath Martha's thinking since 2 a.m, since she'd read the bank letter again and understood what it actually was this: had Marquetta reached beyond the brush? Had someone on the inside of Laban's operation been in contact with her? Had the person who'd sent that carefully worded bank letter, that document disguised as a clerical notice, been responding to Marquetta not acting alone? A machine that size needed people. And people given enough time and enough of the right kind of pressure developed consciences in inconvenient places. She was still turning it over when Luke said quietly from behind her, "She's still there." Martha looked up. They had come around the bend in the creek bed, and the gap in the manzanita opened ahead of them, and Mariposa stood exactly where Martha had left her, pressed against the boulder head. Up now, ears forward, watching them approach with the alert attention of a horse that has been resting and is ready to be done with resting. Marquetta was sitting against the base of the boulder. She stood when she saw them, unhurried, brushing dust from her jacket. She looked at Martha with an expression that was close to satisfaction, but not quite something more careful than that. "She had a good night," Marquetta said. "Legs better. She'll walk if you go slow." Martha dismounted and went directly to Mariposa, putting both hands on the horse's face, feeling the warmth of her, the life of her. The gray mare pressed forward into Martha's hands and huffed once low and warm, the specific sound that meant recognition. "Good girl," Martha said. Her voice did something she didn't intend, went thick at the edges, and she cleared her throat and straightened up. She was not going to cry in front of Marquetta Brown. She was not going to cry in front of anyone. But she held on to Mariposa's halter for an extra second before she turned around. Marquetta was watching her. Not with anything like pity, with something quieter than that. Understanding, maybe. The look of someone who knew exactly what that moment cost. "Thank you," Martha said, "for staying with her." Marquetta nodded once. Then, "Your foreman. Did he get to Millfield?" Martha went very still. "How do you know about Millfield?" "Because it's what I would do," Marquetta said simply. "You had enough by last night to start a federal inquiry. Maybe not enough to win, but enough to start." She folded her arms, not defensively, just the posture of a woman thinking. "Samuel Pratt is the right lawyer. He's handled 3 cases against Le Bon's consortium in the last 2 years, lost 2-1-1, but the one he won set a precedent that's still on the books." She paused. "He's been waiting for someone with enough documentation to build on it." Martha stared at her. Luke behind her had gone completely still. "You know Samuel Pratt," Martha said. "We've been in correspondence for 7 months." The creek bed, the morning heat beginning to build, the sound of Mariposa breathing steadily beside her, all of it went distant for a moment, while Martha processed what she'd just heard. 7 months. Marquetta had been in contact with a federal land lawyer for 7 months, while she watched, while she waited for the ground to show enough. "You've been building a case," Martha said. It wasn't a question. "I've been building the foundation of one," Marquetta said carefully. "What I have, what I've seen, what I've documented isn't enough on its own. I don't have standing. I'm not a landowner in this valley. I can't file a claim or contest a deed." She met Martha's eyes directly. "But you can. And what you have, plus what I have, plus what Samuel Pratt has been assembling for 18 months, that might be enough." Might. Martha heard the word and held on to it, because Marquetta was not a woman who said things loosely, and if she was saying might, she meant it precisely. "What do you have?" Martha asked. Marquetta reached inside her layered jacket and pulled out a folded oilskin packet, flat and thick, the kind of thing you wrapped documents in when you needed them to survive weather and rough travel. She held it out. Martha took it. It was heavier than she expected. She looked at Marquetta. "Open it when you're with Pratt," Marquetta said. "Not before, not on the road. Wait until you're in his office with the door shut." Something moved across her face, not quite warning, not quite urgency, but somewhere between the two. "What's in there is why Vargas ran last night. He found out 2 days ago that someone inside Le Bon's operation had been talking. He didn't know to who. He didn't know how much had been passed." She paused. "Now you know." Martha's fingers tightened on the packet. The paper crinkled slightly under the pressure. "Who's the inside contact?" she said. "You'll see when you open it." Marquetta glanced at Mariposa, then back at Martha. "Get your horse home. Get yourself to Millfield. And do not," her voice went quietly, firmly precise, "let that packet out of your hands until you're sitting across from Samuel Pratt." Luke spoke from behind Martha, his voice measured and level. "You're not coming with us." It wasn't a question either. Marquetta looked at him, then at Martha, and what was in her face was not apology. It was something more like the specific sorrow of a person who has always operated at the edge of things outside the rooms where decisions get made, doing the work that makes other people's decisions possible. "I can't go to Millfield," she said. "I can't walk into a lawyer's office or a federal clerk's or a courthouse. You know why." Martha did know. She hadn't thought about it explicitly until this moment, but she knew. A black woman alone outside the legal structures of a county that LeBon's money had already partially compromised, walking into the middle of a land dispute that powerful people wanted to resolve a very specific way. Whatever Marquetta could do in the brush, whatever she could build in the shadows of this valley, the moment she stepped into official channels, she became a liability instead of an asset. LeBon's people would find a way to use her presence against everything she'd built. "You did all of this," Martha said, and she heard her own voice go quiet with the weight of it. "And you can't be in the room when it matters." Marquetta looked at her steadily. "I was in the room last night," she said. "With your horse. That mattered." Martha held the oilskin packet and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she tucked it inside her own jacket close against her chest, the same way Caleb had tucked the letter. She reached out and shook Marquetta Brown's hand firmly, the way her father had shaken hands, with her full grip and her eyes level. "When this is done," Martha said, "you come to the ranch. I want to know everything you know about this valley." Something shifted in Marquetta's face. The careful, controlled expression she'd held through all of it softened slightly at the edges just for a second before it returned. "We'll see," she said, which was not no. Martha took it as what it was, the closest thing to yes that a woman who had learned not to count on outcomes could offer. They started back through the brush with Mariposa on a lead moving slow to protect the injured leg, Luke ranging slightly ahead to clear the path. Martha rode with the oilskin packet pressing against her ribs, warm from her body heat, and she did not think about what was inside it. She thought about Millfield and Samuel Pratt and the federal postal agent at the railway office, and she thought about Friday and how close it was, and she thought about Lydia LeBon, sitting somewhere even now watching a clock. They were an hour out of the brush when Luke pulled up sharp. Martha came alongside him and saw it immediately. A horse on the road ahead, one horse rider sitting easy in the saddle, not moving toward them or away from them. Just waiting. Not Caleb. The horse was the wrong color, the rider too slight. Martha's hand went to her rifle. Then the rider turned slightly, and the early morning light caught his face, and Luke said quietly, "That's the man from the cabin last night. The thick-shouldered man who had sat down on the step when Caleb told him to. The hired hand." He was sitting on his horse in the middle of the road with his hands visible on the saddle horn, making no threatening gesture, watching them approach. Martha kept her hand on the rifle. "What do you want?" she called when they were close enough. "To talk," the man said. His voice was different from the previous night, quieter, less defended. He looked tired in a way that the night hadn't entirely caused. "Just to talk, ma'am. I've got no weapon in my hands and I'm not looking for trouble." "You were holding stolen horses on a criminal operation last night. That's all the trouble you need." "Yes, ma'am." He didn't look away. "I know that. I'm not here to argue it." He shifted in the saddle, and the movement was careful and deliberate, the movement of a man making sure nothing he did looked threatening. "I'm here because Vargas left last night, and before he left, he said something I've been thinking about since." Martha said nothing, waited. "He said LeBon's filing the paperwork today," the man said. "Not Friday, today. She moved it up because she got word last night that the horses had been recovered." He paused. "I don't know how she got word that fast, but she did, and she's not waiting." The air between them went tight and still. "Today," Martha said. "That's what Vargas said before he rode out. Said LeBon would have someone at the county clerk's office when it opened at 8 o'clock. He looked at her steadily. "It's past 7 now." Martha turned to Luke. His face had gone completely flat, the expression of a man running calculations. "Millfield is 40 minutes from here at a hard ride," he said. The county clerk's office is in Millfield. 40 minutes. And it was past 7. And Caleb had left the ranch at 6, and Millfield was 40 minutes from the ranch at a pace that wouldn't kill the horse. Which meant, Caleb is already there, Martha said. Maybe, Luke said. If he didn't stop. If nothing slowed him down. Martha looked at the man on the road. Why are you telling me this? He was quiet for a moment. He looked down at his hands on the saddle horn, then back up at her, and what was in his face was not complicated. It was the simple expression of a man who had gone a step too far and knew it. I've done rough work, he said. I've done things I'm not proud of for money because there wasn't other money available. But I've never done what this is, using the law like a weapon against a woman who hasn't done anything wrong. He paused. That's a different thing. That's something I'm not going to have on me. Martha looked at him for 3 seconds. She was thinking about Marquetta, who had spent a year building something because she couldn't walk into official rooms. She was thinking about the person inside Laban's bank who had sent a letter disguised as a clerical notice. She was thinking about how many people had been standing at the edges of this thing, doing what they could from where they were, because there was no clean way to stand directly inside it. Get out of this county, she said to the man. Don't come back. He nodded. He didn't say thank you, and she didn't want him to. He turned his horse south and rode. Luke was already looking at her. We need to move. Mariposa can't. Leave me with Mariposa, Luke said. I'll bring her in slow. You go. Luke. Martha. His voice was level and certain. Go. She went. She pushed Ranger hard on the road to Millfield, harder than she'd pushed a horse in years, the summer heat already building around her, and the oilskin packet pressing against her ribs, and the clock in her chest counting down against a deadline that had just moved from Friday to now. The road was dry and straight for the first 3 miles, then curved through a low draw before it opened up on the valley floor that led into town. She was in the draw when she saw the second rider, coming toward her. Fast. She reined Ranger in hard, her hand going to the rifle, and then she recognized the horse, the seat, the set of the shoulders. Caleb. Riding back toward her at a pace that meant something had already happened. They pulled up hard when they reached each other, both horses blowing. She's already there, Caleb said before Martha could speak. His face was taut and tight. Laban. She had a man at the clerk's office when I rode up. I saw them through the window talking to the clerk, laying papers on the counter. Did you get to Pratt? I got the letter to the postal agent first, then went to Pratt's office. He was there. He'd already heard from someone that something was happening at the clerk's office, and he was heading over. Caleb paused. Martha, he knows. He's already got documents of his own. When I told him your name, he just looked at me and said, Whitmore Ranch, the Aquifer, like he'd been waiting. Martha felt something move through her, part relief, and part something she couldn't name, the sensation of understanding that you have been, without knowing it, part of a larger plan. Marquetta. Samuel Pratt. 7 months of correspondence. An inside contact with access to bank records. A packet of documents heavy enough to mean something. She pulled the oilskin packet from inside her jacket and held it out to Caleb. This came from Marquetta Brown. It goes directly to Pratt. Tell him it came from his correspondent in the valley. Caleb took it. His eyes went briefly to it, then back to her. His correspondent in the valley, he repeated. He'll know. What are you going to do? Martha had already turned Ranger back toward Millfield. I'm going to walk into that clerk's office, she said over her shoulder, and I'm going to make Lydia Laban look me in the eye. She heard Caleb say behind her something she couldn't quite make out, but the tone of it was something between admiration and resignation, and she took it as permission. The clerk's office was on the main street of Millfield, a low timber building with county seal above the door and 2 windows facing the street. Martha dismounted at the hitching rail, tied Ranger, and walked in. The room was not large. 4 people in it. The clerk, a young man named Bowers, whom Martha had dealt with twice before, who currently looked as though he wished he were anywhere else, and 2 men in Eastern suits who were standing at the counter with a stack of documents between them. And Lydia Laban herself, standing at the far end of the counter in a dark blue traveling dress, immaculate despite the hour and the heat, with a leather satchel on the counter beside her, and an expression of composed authority that had clearly served her well in many rooms before this one. She turned when Martha walked in. For one moment, just one something moved across Laban's face. Not alarm, not guilt. Something more controlled than either of those. Recognition, maybe. Recalibration. Then it was gone, replaced by a pleasantness so smooth it was almost a form of contempt. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said. "What a coincidence." "It isn't," Martha said. She did not look at the clerk or the suited men. She looked at Lydia Laban and walked to the counter and stood 3 feet away from her. "Whatever you have on that counter, Mr. Bowers hasn't signed it yet." The clerk looked between the two women with the expression of a man trapped between two weather systems. "The documents are entirely in order, Mrs. Whitmore," Laban said with a patience that was itself a kind of weapon. "Your account is in arrears under the terms of the water access covenant filed in—" "The account was altered," Martha said. Flat, even, no rise in her voice. "At the bank, by someone inside the bank at your direction. The letter documenting that alteration has been in federal postal hands since this morning." A silence. One of the suited men glanced at Laban. She did not glance back. She kept her eyes on Martha with the particular fixed calm of someone who has been in difficult rooms before and knows that the person who moves first loses. "That's a serious accusation," Laban said. "It's a documented one," Martha said. "Samuel Pratt is in possession of the documentation as of approximately 20 minutes ago. He's also in possession of records from your operations in 3 other counties, the Callaway transaction, the Henderson property, and the water rights filings in Ridgemont that went through a shell company registered in Delaware." She paused. "A company that doesn't exist." The clerk had gone very still. Laban's expression did not change, but something behind it did a slight tightening, almost invisible, the kind of thing you only caught if you were watching for it. Martha was watching for it. "Mr. Bowers," Martha said without looking away from Laban, "I'd recommend you don't sign anything today." "Now see here," one of the suited men started. The door behind Martha opened. Samuel Pratt walked in. He was a compact man in his 50s, gray at the temples, with the unhurried movement of someone who had learned that entering a room quickly made people assume you were worried. He was not worried. He had a leather satchel under his arm and the oilskin packet in his hand, and he went directly to the counter and set both down without ceremony. "Mr. Bowers," he said pleasantly, "I'm filing a federal injunction against the processing of any property transactions involving the Whitmore Ranch effective immediately. You'll want to read this before you touch anything on that counter." He set a folded document on top of the papers Laban's men had laid out. Then he turned to Laban with an expression of professional courtesy that contained somewhere behind it something considerably colder. "Ms. Laban, I believe you and I have some documentation to discuss." Laban looked at the oilskin packet on the counter. Martha watched her look at it. Watched the specific quality of the pause that followed, the pause of someone recognizing something they believed to be safely hidden, finding it in the wrong room. "Where did you get that?" Laban said. Her voice was still controlled, but the pleasantness was gone from it. What remained was precise and cold. "From a correspondent who's been in this valley longer than your operation," Pratt said, and watching it more carefully. Another pause, longer this time. Then Lydia Laban straightened her jacket. She picked up her leather satchel. She looked at Martha with an expression that had passed beyond anger into something much more dangerous, the look of someone resetting for a longer fight. "This isn't finished," she said. "No," Martha agreed. "But today it is." Laban walked out. Her 2 suited men followed, one of them gathering the documents from the counter, with the particular careful haste of someone who has been told to make no sudden movements. The door closed behind them. The clerk let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere near his knees. Pratt looked at Martha. "You'll need to come to my office," he said. "There's a great deal to go through, and we don't have much time before she files a counter-challenge." He picked up the oilskin packet, held it for a moment. Your contact in the valley, is she well? Martha thought of Marquita in the gap between the manzanita branches, sitting against a boulder in the dark, with a wounded horse, building something for a year, with no guarantee anyone would ever walk through the door she'd left open. She's well, Martha said. Pratt nodded. He turned toward the door, and Martha followed him. And outside, the summer morning was pressing down hot and white on the main street of Millfield, and the clock was still running, and there was still a great deal of road left between this moment and something that could be called finished. But the filing had not gone through, and Lydia Laban had looked at that oilskin packet and recognized it, and that recognition had told Martha something important, something that tightened the shape of the fight considerably. Laban knew what was in it, which meant she knew who had put it together, which meant Marquetta Brown was no longer invisible. Martha walked into Samuel Pratt's office, sat down across from his desk, and did not let herself think about that yet. There was too much to do before she could afford to think about what it meant. But it was there underneath everything, a cold, specific knowledge that the fight had just changed shape in a way she hadn't anticipated, and that somewhere in the valley behind her in the brush, that gave nothing back easily, a woman who had been watching for a year had just become something she'd never intended to be. Visible. Samuel Pratt's office smelled like old paper and lamp oil, and the particular kind of quiet that comes from a room where serious things have been decided over many years. Martha sat across from his desk and watched him open the oilskin packet with the careful hands of a man who understood that what he was touching mattered. He didn't speak while he read. That was the first thing she noticed about him. He had the discipline to be completely silent when the words in front of him required it. No murmuring, no reaction sounds, no glances up at her to signal what he was thinking. He simply read, turning each page with the same deliberate care, and Martha sat across from him and felt the minutes moving and made herself stay still. Caleb was in the outer office. She'd heard him settle into a chair when she and Pratt came in, heard the familiar creak of his boots crossing at the ankle, heard the particular silence of a man who was not going to be useful inside, but was absolutely going to be present outside. Pratt turned the last page, set it face down on the stack, sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment before he looked at her. "Do you know what this is?" he said. "Documents," Martha said, "from inside Laban's operation. More specifically than that." He leaned forward and tapped the stack with 2 fingers. "This is a sworn affidavit from a man named Gerald Foss, who served as accounts manager at the First Territorial Bank of Millfield for 11 years, until 6 weeks ago when he resigned. In this affidavit, Mr. Foss states that he was instructed on 3 separate occasions with written direction that he retained copies of to alter account records for 6 ranching properties in this county, your property among them." He paused. He names the person who gave him those instructions. Martha held very still. Laban, her direct representative, a man named Claude Harwick, who serves as her operations manager. Pratt's voice was precise and measured, the voice of a man controlling the pace of information deliberately. "Harwick has been in this county for 14 months. He's the one who filed the water rights dispute. He's the one who set up the shell company." He paused again. "And according to Foss's affidavit, he's the one who arranged the manufactured default on your account." "Gerald Foss," Martha said slowly. "I don't know that name." "You wouldn't. He worked in the back office." Pratt looked at her. "He sent you a letter 6 weeks ago." Martha felt it click into place, the letter she'd read twice, the carefully worded clerical notice that had read like an error report and contained, she'd finally understood, at 2 a.m, a record of exactly what had been done to her account. "He was trying to tell me," she said. "He couldn't come forward directly. He had a family here. Laban's people had made clear in terms he understood that his employment and other things depended on his cooperation and his silence." Pratt's jaw tightened briefly. "He went to your contact in the valley instead. He'd heard of her somehow. These things move through communities in ways that don't always have explanations." He set his hand flat on the affidavit. "She convinced him to put it in writing. It took 4 months. 4 months. Martha thought about Marquetta sitting in the brush, patient and still as the manzanita itself, working on a frightened bank clerk for 4 months, while Laban's operation built toward its conclusion. Building trust. Building courage. Building a document that could survive a courtroom. The affidavit alone, Pratt said, is enough to halt the property filing and open a criminal fraud investigation. He paused. Combined with what I've assembled from the Callaway and Henderson transactions and the federal land records I've been subpoenaing for the past 8 months, it's enough to do considerably more than that. Martha looked at him. You've been working on this for 8